Hi, everybody. It's Dr. Patricia Coughlin again. I've had a little bit of a hiatus here. I had pneumonia. I mean, you could hear something going on the last time I made a video, and so I've been kind of down for the count. But I did want to respond to a request by one of the subscribers who wanted to get some more understanding of what we might call superego pathology. When we have patients who are suffering under the burden of a very harsh and punitive superego, or what we might call that. So first of all, let's remember there is no such thing as a superego, right? It's a concept, right? It's something that helps us to understand the part of our personality that's actually identified with caretakers, with authorities, and with the culture, to have us both rein in some of our more wild and destructive impulses, right, and to fit into society, right? What happens when that part of the psyche really takes over and this need to be punished and to suffer has the patient in its grip? So let's just talk a little bit about what we mean by a superego, then a punitive superego, how that's going to show up and affect the therapy, and how you can deal with that therapeutically. The subscriber also asked about how the punitive superego is operating in a case of depression, and that's something specific, and it's a complex topic, so I may have to leave that second part for another video. But let's talk about what do we mean when we talk about superego or conscience. Again, it's that part of the personality that is in fact identified with authorities, parental figures, and with society. Winnicott and Klein talked about guilt, right, being a feeling that is associated with this conscience or superego. It is this feeling of remorse when we actually want to hurt or do hurt someone else. And they considered this actually a developmental achievement and something that is related to the child's ability to overcome their egocentric nature and actually to have concern for the other. This is in contrast to shame, which is ultimately a feeling about the self. Oh, I feel bad about me, right? As opposed to, I feel really badly that I've hurt someone else. So that ability to have concern for the other and to take responsibility for and feel guilty and remorseful about harming another and or also violating our own values and norms. Because again, the superego or the conscience is not just destructive, right? It helps us to have ideals and values that we're striving for. And so when we break our own vows, when we violate our own integrity, we hurt ourselves as well as others. And so that awful feeling of remorse and guilt, which really is, I think, the most difficult emotion for us to feel, actually has an adaptive purpose. It kind of keeps us in line and keeps us, if we allow ourselves to feel it, from actually doing the deed, right? Doing something that's going to harm others and violate our own principles. And then if it doesn't work in that preemptory way and we actually do something to harm another, to feel that guilt would allow us to actually acknowledge the harm done and make some kind of repair. But as I said, it seems to me that this feeling of guilt and remorse is extremely painful and difficult for us to bear. So it's really the defenses against our guilt that get us into trouble, either rationalizing and justifying why we did it, trying to avoid that guilt, or and this is the really important one for us in our work, is self-punishment, self-attack, filling ourselves with physical and emotional pain, allowing ourselves to be used and abused by others, or overtly trying to destroy ourselves with alcohol and drugs, pushing away positive figures while engaging others to, really mistreat us, right? These would be the signs of self-punishment, which are connected to guilt, but are actually a defense against it, right? Rather than feel that guilt and do something about it, we either punish ourselves or engage others to punish us. And so I think a really important thing to understand about this whole concept of the superego or conscience, which registers this guilt and sometimes can really dole out quite a bit of punishment, is that the need to be punished is not the sole or even perhaps the overriding cause of that suffering, but actually that guilt is connected to love. And so really is the development of the superego or the conscience. It's connected to love for others. And so when a patient, for example, turns their anger towards someone else back onto the self, yes, it ends up hurting them, but that's often an unintended consequence, not necessarily the motivation. That the motivation is to protect the other, to protect the loved one from our rage, from our destructive impulses, right? So I think this whole topic of guilt and self-punishment, how to tease those apart, right? Understanding that the self-punishment is a defense against the experience of guilt, that guilt is tied to love and therefore would prompt repair, is really a pivotal process in psychotherapy. First of all, to unearth and to make conscious the guilt that the patient is harboring about their own destructiveness, and then to let them connect that to love and the desire to repair. Because if they don't, and if they stay stuck somehow in this need for suffering, and I think that is what this person who wrote to me was talking about, where the need to suffer is somehow syntonic. And Freud discovered that the superego's resistance is the most difficult to tackle. And he even came to the point where he said we must simply bow to the superiority of the superego's resistance, which again is that need to continue to suffer. And he says it's that has our efforts come to nothing. So by this time in his career, he had become quite hopeless and pessimistic about the human race. And his passivity in the face of this superego resistance, which would prevent you from getting close, prevent you from helping them, prevent healing and freedom, and again, perpetuate suffering. Davenlu said, Freud took a wrong turn there when he went passive in the face of that. We must take that resistance on directly. And this is where Davenlu created the whole intervention of the head-on collision, looking at how the patient's need to hold on to suffering, right, was in fact going to undermine all therapeutic efforts, and that unless and until the patient could see this destructive part of them in operation to undermine the health, to hold on to their suffering, that all the therapist's efforts will go to nothing, right? The patient has to see and then turn on their own self-punitive system in order to allow you close enough to help them, right? And to help them be relieved of suffering. So as in one of my cases where we were able to really get to this terrible guilt this woman had been harboring about her own very angry and violent impulses toward many family members. When she saw that, right? That she had harbored this rage and this guilt about the rage, and that she had been punishing herself for that all her life. I said, so is that what you want to keep doing? Does the punishment fit the crime? Do you need to continue to suffer? And she said, no, no, I have had enough of that. I have done that for 1 year, 10 years, 50 years. Enough is enough. So this is really we might in technical terms say, the healthy ego standing up against this oppressive, punitive force of the superego, right, to let her be free and to work with me so that she could, in fact, resolve her difficulties and free herself to live a happy life. So I hope this begins to give you some understanding of how, at least in psychoanalytic thought, through Freud to Davenlu, we both understand the relationship between guilt and self-punishment and what's going to be required to help the patient turn on that need for punishment so that they can really actively engage in a treatment that's designed to free them of that suffering. So I'm sure I will make another video about this, going further into how depression is also very much tied up with this whole issue of the need to suffer and do penance and so on. So I'm going to be away next week, but the following week I will do an additional post on this. So I hope it's helpful. And again, give me feedback and more questions, and we'll continue to explore these very important topics. Thank you. Bye-bye.